Have you ever wondered how many of your choices are truly yours, and how many are reflections of expectations you've never questioned? We live surrounded by mirrors that show us distorted images of who we should be, while the masks we wear hide the truths we fear to face. But what if behind all of this, there lies a more authentic version of yourself, suffocated by outdated ideas of what it means to be a man? We are living through a profound crisis of masculine identity, reflected in the disintegration of the traditional family structure. But what truly fuels this crisis? In the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, Rediscovering the Archetypes of the Mature Masculine, Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette identify two central elements: the absence of meaningful rituals and the distortion of the concept of patriarchy. Imagine a young man from an ancestral tribe being taken into the forest, separated from the comfort of his home. He is tested, physically and emotionally, challenged to face his greatest fears. Guided by elders, these trials are not merely difficulties, they are bridges to something greater. Through these rituals, the boy undergoes a kind of symbolic death, the death of his immaturity, to be reborn as a man. He emerges not just stronger, but connected to something deeper, the wisdom of the collective, of nature, and of himself. This process, which could take years, was essential for shaping a mature and conscious masculinity. Today, these rituals are lost. In their place, disfigured versions have emerged, such as gang initiations, hazing in universities, or power dynamics in activist groups and even the military. Yet these modern rituals often fail to teach resilience or purpose. Instead, they promote violence, passivity, or distorted masculinity. The result? Men who remain emotionally boys because they never had the chance to cross the threshold into maturity. And then there's patriarchy. Far beyond being merely a system of power, it reflects immature masculinity, an expression of fear and control. Think of a boy who, insecure in himself, seeks to dominate others to hide his vulnerabilities. This is how patriarchy operates, perpetuating oppression, not just against women, but also against men who dare to embody authentic masculinity. As Moore and Gillette point out, this dynamic creates a cycle of fear. Boys fear women, but they also fear true men, those who embody strength, compassion, and balance. Patriarchy isn't just a prison for women, it's a reflection of the collective inability to nurture men who live with integrity, purpose, and respect. The question remains: how can we reclaim this lost path? Perhaps it's time to recreate our own rituals, not in isolated forests, but in the challenges and connections that surround us, helping each other cross the bridge from boy to man with courage and authenticity. After all, the journey of masculinity is not about domination, but about transformation. Today we see movements like the Red Pill community, men going their own way, and even so-called incels gaining momentum. These groups largely reflect something deeper: the internal struggle of masculine psychology in a world seemingly lost in defining what it means to be a man. Meanwhile, a radical view of feminism claims that masculinity, at its core, is abusive, relegating qualities like love, compassion, and empathy exclusively to the feminine side of humanity. But is this true? This interpretation misses something fundamental. True masculinity, one that is deep, mature, and rooted, is not abusive. On the contrary, it is protective, creative, and purposeful. Think of a sculptor transforming a raw stone into art. It is this creative, disciplined, and nurturing force that defines masculinity at its fullest potential. The problem is that, on our way to this maturity, we often face resistance, not from external forces but from immaturity, both within ourselves and in others, which fears any progress toward the fullness of being. Today, the crisis of mature masculinity is palpable. We live in a society that offers no meaningful ritual processes to guide boys into adulthood, nor does it provide mature men as role models. The absence of ritual elders, those who in other cultures would guide young men through this transition, leaves a void. Many men as a result feel anxious, frustrated, ashamed, and even helpless, as if the very act of being a man were under siege. And the solution? It's not less masculinity, but more mature masculinity. Moore and Gillette, deeply influenced by Jung, call this the psychology of manhood, a state in which men do not destroy but build, do not dominate but lead with purpose, do not fear but know themselves. The opposite is the boy psychology, marked by impulsive, selfish, and destructive behaviors. Herein lies a powerful hope. Even if the external world fails, with absent fathers, immature leaders, and a culture lacking meaningful rituals, the journey is not lost. The secret lies within each of us, in the archetypes of mature masculinity. These archetypes are universal images that live in the collective unconscious and represent dormant potentials ready to be awakened. Think of the king, who rules with wisdom, the warrior, who protects with courage, the magician, who transforms with knowledge, and the lover, who connects with passion. These figures are not just myths, they are internal models we can activate. Yes, our real fathers may have failed to show these patterns, but they still live within us, waiting to be awakened. The key is to stop searching outward and start looking inward. Mature masculinity is not imposed, it is discovered. It is a process that begins with the acceptance that, despite external challenges, the strength to mature lies within each of us, ready to transform raw stones into true masterpieces. Many of us grew up without sufficient parental guidance to lead us to emotional maturity. As a result, we often confuse controlling or even hostile attitudes with signs of strength. But, upon closer inspection, we see that these behaviors reveal something deeper: the vulnerability of a wounded boy within us. We've explored before the archetype of the puer aeternus, or eternal boy, which can be both a source of creativity and energy and an obstacle to self-realization, trapping us in unrealistic fantasies. Now let's dive even deeper into immature masculine archetypes and how they shape our lives. Before we can understand the mature archetypes, the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover, we must first recognize the immature versions we all encounter in the early stages of life. These archetypes are represented by the divine child, the precocious child, the Oedipal child, and finally, the hero. However, human development does not follow a linear path. These archetypes often overlap and continue to influence our behavior well into adulthood. Each of these immature archetypes has a mature counterpart. The divine child transforms into the king, the precocious child evolves into the magician, the Oedipal child blossoms into the lover, and the hero finds its full expression in the warrior. These archetypes do not disappear as we mature. On the contrary, a mature man learns to integrate the forces of childhood into his adult psyche, rather than attempting to eradicate them. The key is not to fully identify with any one archetype, but to recognize it as part of a larger dynamic within us, something we can access and transform. To truly work with these archetypes, we need to ask two important questions. First, it's not a matter of whether the shadow aspects of these archetypes are present in our lives, but rather how they are manifesting. This requires humility, the ability to acknowledge our limitations and seek help when necessary. The second question is, are we honoring or ignoring the positive aspects of these archetypes? If we don't feel their influence in our daily lives, perhaps it's time to reflect on how we might be blocking their potential. For instance, the divine child, the most primitive of the immature masculine archetypes, is paradoxical. It believes itself to be the center of the universe, all-powerful, yet it is simultaneously utterly helpless. Think of a baby, completely dependent on others, yet its mere existence seems to command all attention. This archetype is deeply rooted in myths and religions. Consider the myth of Horus, the Egyptian god, conceived by the goddess Isis after Osiris's death, or the birth of Jesus, conceived by Mary through the Holy Spirit. Both are examples of miraculous births, symbolizing the promise of something new and powerful, but also laden with fragility. In Jesus' case, his life is threatened almost immediately after his birth by King Herod, who seeks to eliminate him. These archetypes, even in their immature forms, teach us important lessons. The divine child, for example, reminds us of the limitless potential within us, but also warns of the need to grow beyond the illusion of self-sufficiency. This is how we begin to build a mature masculinity, by recognizing the archetypes that inhabit our psyche and learning to walk with them without losing ourselves in their shadow. Imagine a baby floating on the Nile, protected only by a basket. This was the beginning of Moses, who would later free his people. Stories like this appear across cultures. In Mesopotamia, we find King Sargon of Akkad, who was also placed in a basket and set adrift. In Hindu mythology, Krishna was born under the prophecy that he would defeat the tyrant Kamsa. To prevent this, Kamsa imprisoned Krishna's parents and killed their first 6 children. But on the night of Krishna's birth, something miraculous happened. A celestial light filled the prison, his father's chains broke, and the newborn was carried safely across a raging river. These stories capture the essence of the divine child archetype. It represents the miracle of new life, full of potential and innocence, yet profoundly vulnerable. This archetype doesn't only live in stories, it resides within us. Often, dreaming of a newborn child signals the emergence of something new, a project, an idea, or even a renewed version of oneself. It's as if life is offering us a chance to begin again. But this new life rarely comes without resistance. Just as King Kamsa sought to destroy Krishna, what is new and pure within us also attracts threats, both external and internal. For example, imagine a man in therapy saying, "I think I'm finally getting better." Almost immediately, an inner voice responds, "No, you know you'll never change." This internal dialogue reflects the battle we fight to protect our nascent potential. Psychology offers different perspectives on the divine child. Some view it as childish and pathological, something to be overcome. Others see it as a source of creativity and wholeness. Both perspectives have merit. One addresses the shadow of this archetype, while the other focuses on its positive and integrative side. It's crucial to understand the shadows of the divine child, which Moore and Gillette describe as bipolar. They have both an active and a passive pole. On the active pole, we find the high chair tyrant. Picture a small child in their high chair, banging on the table, throwing food on the floor, and demanding constant attention. This behavior reflects traits like arrogance, irresponsibility, and a narcissism that believes the world should revolve around them. The high chair tyrant lives in a world of illusions. He expects absolute perfection and rejects any failure. When his expectations aren't met, he can become destructive both to himself and others. The ancient Greeks had a word for this, hybris, the arrogance that inevitably leads to nemesis, or retribution. It's the same principle found in the Bible. Pride comes before a fall. Recognizing the high chair tyrant within ourselves is essential for growth. It reminds us that we are not the center of the universe, and that life does not exist to fulfill all our expectations. Only by relinquishing this illusion can we open ourselves to true maturity. A maturity that allows us to integrate the pure potential of the divine child with the wisdom that comes from accepting our imperfections and limitations. Imagine a child who seems helpless, always whining or complaining. This is the weak prince, a passive expression of the divine child archetype. He manipulates those around him with exaggerated helplessness, convincing his parents that he is a perpetual victim. When something goes wrong, like a fight with a sibling, he quickly assumes the role of the wronged party, and the parents, often without questioning, take his side and punish the other sibling. In this way, the weak prince keeps himself at the center of attention, with the world revolving around his comfort. This dynamic, however, is not fixed. Much like bipolar disorder, the boy trapped in the shadow of the divine child oscillates between two extremes, from explosive tyrant to fragile victim. In one moment, he demands and dominates. In the next, he laments his weakness, seeking empathy. This alternation reflects a dysfunctional system, but is a common cycle in many family and social contexts. As problematic as the shadow of the divine child may be, it alerts us to something crucial: the need for connection to our childlike essence. Without this, life loses its vibrancy. We become bored, drained, and unable to see the abundant potential around us. Unfortunately, we live in an era that often celebrates mediocrity, a kind of curse of normalcy. Sometimes, even therapists, disconnected from their own divine child, diminish the brilliance and vitality of their patients. as if envious of that creative, fresh energy. A powerful example of the precocious child, a variation of the divine child, can be seen in the figure of the Egyptian magician Imhotep. A statuette depicts him as a boy, seated on a throne with a scroll in his hands. His face reflects grace, balance, and intense curiosity, with eyes focused on the words, as if seeking to unlock the secrets of the universe. This archetype represents a curious child, eager to learn, who constantly asks, why, and seeks connections others fail to see. This is the archetype that gives rise to child prodigies, talented children who, though introverted, have a deep need to share their knowledge and help others. They keep alive in us the sense of wonder and curiosity, nurturing our intellect and guiding us toward the mature magician archetype, one who transforms wisdom into creative power. But the precocious child archetype also has its shadow side. In its active pole, it manifests as the know-it-all trickster, a manipulative and arrogant figure. Imagine someone who uses their intelligence to deceive, create illusions, or humiliate others. This person turns knowledge into a weapon, intimidating and showing off, but often alienating those around them. They do not seek connection but domination, and they end up reaping loneliness and hostility as a result. These archetypes teach us that while we need to preserve our childlike curiosity and sense of wonder, we also need to integrate them with maturity. Without balance, the divine child and its variations can become not a source of creativity and inspiration, but an obstacle to growth and harmony. The key lies in learning from these shadows and transforming them so that they guide us rather than imprison us. Imagine a character who seems to know everything, but uses that knowledge to humiliate others and destabilize any inflated ego around them. This is the know-it-all trickster, a destructive side of the precocious child archetype. While they play an interesting role in exposing lies and reminding us of our human limitations, their energy, if unchecked, can become toxic. Instead of fostering creativity and growth, they paralyze the potential of those who embody this energy. Behind this behavior lies a hidden motivation: envy. Often, this energy stems from painful childhood experiences, such as emotional abuse or a lack of validation. The know-it-all trickster has no heroes because admiring them would mean acknowledging that others possess something valuable. They avoid recognizing their own uniqueness, hiding behind criticism and sarcasm. At the opposite extreme of the shadow of the precocious child is the naive puppet. They may appear harmless, but their lack of personality, creativity, or vigor can be deceiving. Though they seem slow or indifferent, the puppet often harbors a hidden sense of grandiosity, believing themselves too important or too fragile to fully engage with the world. This disconnection creates a curious cycle. They hide a know-it-all trickster within themselves, masking deep insecurities. Both the trickster and the puppet reflect an excessive and immature attachment to the maternal figure. However, this attachment is not to the real mother, but to the archetype of the Great Mother, a romanticized image of an endlessly nurturing, loving, and perfect figure. This fantasy of connection to a divine mother can inspire, but it can also imprison. A practical example of this dynamic comes from a young man in therapy who, during a heated argument with his mother, accidentally blurted out, "God, Mother of all, Almighty." He meant to say, "God Almighty Father." But the Freudian slip revealed a hidden truth. He was projecting onto the archetype of the mother a divine dimension that his mortal mother could never fulfill. Both laughed nervously, but the moment was transformative. The young man began to separate his real mother from the idealized Great Mother, relieving her of the burden of impossible expectations. By transferring this projection to the archetype, he also freed other women from unrealistic demands, allowing his relationships to become healthier and more genuine. This process of untangling from the image of the Divine Mother is essential for maturation, especially for men stuck in the mama's boy shadow side of the Oedipal child archetype. This boy fantasizes about marrying his mother, particularly when a strong paternal figure is absent. Freud captured this dynamic in the concept of the Oedipus complex, inspired by the tragedy of Oedipus, who killed his father, the king, and married his mother. These stories and archetypes reveal how our connection to the mother, whether real or idealized, profoundly influences our psyche. Only when we learn to see beyond these projections, recognizing and integrating these aspects, can we break free from cycles of emotional dependence and find a more mature and balanced path in life. Imagine discovering that everything you believed about yourself was a lie. A revelation so devastating, it destroys the very foundation of your identity. This is what happened to Oedipus, who unknowingly carried an unconscious pretense of divinity. He lived as though untouchable, but this illusion led to his downfall. This dynamic is not exclusive to ancient myths. It reflects the journey of every child who, in their early universe, sees the mother as a goddess and the father as a god. Now consider the mama's boy. He endlessly seeks a mortal goddess that he will never find in a real woman. This quest, marked by the so-called Don Juan syndrome, keeps him trapped in cycles of superficial relationships, unable to connect or take responsibility. He lives on the periphery of himself, often seeking solitary gratification, disconnected from any genuine exchange with another person. On the other hand, there is the passive side of the Oedipal child, the dreamer. This young man retreats into fantasies, isolating himself from the world and people. His depression often hides an internal grandiosity, a subconscious quest for that archetypal mother, perfect and unattainable in any real person. He becomes withdrawn, unproductive, with dreams oscillating between idealism and melancholy, like a modern version of Peter Pan, refusing to leave Neverland, where everything is eternally safe and responsibility-free. By contrast, the hero emerges as a more advanced force in the masculine psyche. He represents the energetic adolescent, ready to face challenges and assert his independence. Joseph Campbell, in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, describes the hero's journey as a universal process, the young man breaking free from the devouring mother and leaping into the abyss, confronting symbolic dragons. This is the moment when the hero takes up his sword and ventures into the heart of darkness, driven by courage and purpose. But here lies the problem. Our society often devalues the hero. Those who strive to rise above mediocrity are frequently pulled down by conformists who try to extinguish any spark of greatness. We live in a world that desperately needs a renaissance of the heroic spirit. Only through this heroic consciousness can we find the strength to emerge from chaos and build something meaningful. However, there's a detail often overlooked. The hero archetype, inspiring as it may be, is not the final destination of maturity. Moore and Gillette emphasize that it remains immature. If a man remains trapped in the hero's mindset, he will never reach the fullness of maturity. Think of medieval legends. We rarely hear what happens after the hero slays the dragon and marries the princess. Why? Because the hero doesn't know what to do next. He excels in confronting monsters, but falters when faced with the subtler challenges of daily life, such as cultivating a connection with the princess, who symbolizes the anima or feminine soul within himself. This transition from hero to mature man is the true challenge. It's not enough to slay dragons and conquer kingdoms. One must learn to live with purpose, integrating the hero's courage with the wisdom and compassion that come from maturation. This is how we move beyond myths and into the fullness of life. The hero, after escaping the grip of the unconscious feminine, finds himself facing an even greater challenge, learning to integrate the feminine into his life consciously. His journey, culminating in a symbolic death, reveals an unexpected enemy, himself. By confronting his limitations and his shadow, the hero discovers that the true obstacle was never a dragon or external force, but his own unheroic and shadowed sides. This revelation is the gateway to genuine humility, a milestone in the transition from the boy psychology to the man psychology. However, the hero, in his arrogance, often fails to recognize his mortality and limitations. This is when he risks falling, driven by an inflated sense of self-importance and invulnerability. The active pole of the hero's shadow, the big bully, is characterized by a need to impress and dominate, believing the stage is his by right. He masks his inner cowardice with verbal or physical attacks, insisting on proving his masculinity destructively. This arrogance often leads to self-destruction, risking everything to maintain his image. On the other hand, The passive pole of the hero's shadow is the coward, who avoids confrontation at all costs. He prefers to flee from conflicts, allowing himself to be emotionally and intellectually intimidated. Yet within this coward lies hidden grandiosity that, when it erupts, can manifest in explosive outbursts, catching everyone around him by surprise. This cycle of submission and eruption demonstrates how the extremes of the hero's shadow hinder full growth. To overcome these shadows and step into maturity, it is essential to access the mature masculine archetypes, which are built on the foundations of childhood. This requires taking responsibility, even for what we are not directly accountable. While we are not to blame for the traumas or experiences that stunted our growth, leaving things as they are or simply rebelling against society leads nowhere. True freedom, as has been said, is what we do with what has been done to us. The process of individuation, becoming a complete individual, is the journey of filling our inner essence, our soul. This is the greater purpose of life, to find meaning and align it with our being. At the center of this process is the archetype of the king, the foundation of all mature masculinity. He is the cornerstone upon which the other archetypes, the warrior, the magician, and the lover, are built. The king, which Jung referred to as the archetype of the self, is the central point around which the masculine psyche is organized. He has two primary functions that enable the transition from boy psychology to man psychology: ordering and providing fertility and blessings. The function of ordering refers to the king's ability to bring structure and balance to chaos, both within and outside himself. He creates harmony in his realm, whether that be his personal life, relationships, or community. Fertility and blessings represent his power to nurture and inspire growth, both in himself and in others. The king does not rule for himself alone, but for the well-being of all those under his influence. This archetype is the model of the mature man, a leader who is firm yet compassionate, creative yet grounded in reality. He does not need to prove his worth through force or submission. He simply is. By accessing the king within us, we take the first step to leaving behind the hero's shadows and entering a state of full balanced maturity. The king, at his core, is the force that brings order to chaos, a central theme in mythologies and religions throughout history. He is symbolized by the sun, the ruler of the heavens in many cultures, representing the light of masculine consciousness triumphing over the darkness of unconsciousness. Historically, mortal kings were seen as living embodiments of this energy. When they fully embodied their role, the kingdom prospered. Their vitality and sexual vigor were direct reflections of the fertility of the land, abundant harvests, healthy herds, and numerous families. This belief was rooted in the concept of sympathetic magic, the idea that like influences like. The king's inner state was the microcosm of the state of the kingdom, as above, so below, as within, so without. Conversely, when the king weakened, due to age, illness, or loss of vigor, the kingdom reflected this decay. Chaos arose, crops failed, livestock stopped reproducing, and the people faced hardship. This connection between the king's state and the welfare of the kingdom was not merely metaphorical. It echoes in our personal lives. For example, in families where the father is absent, immature, or unable to embody the king's energy, chaos often ensues. Children grow up without a guiding figure, and family harmony disintegrates. This dynamic is so ancient that in alchemical manuscripts, we see the old king being ritually killed, a metaphor for the need to renew the king's energy when he can no longer maintain order. The king is more than a symbol of fertility and strength. He also represents blessing. A good king recognizes and values the positive qualities in others. He promotes worthy men to positions of responsibility, sees potential in his people, and rewards them justly. More than being present to be seen, he is there to see. His role is not just to govern, but to admire, guide, and inspire. Being blessed by this energy brings profound psychological transformation, offering validation and purpose. Today, many young men desperately seek this recognition from older male figures. They yearn for validation, for a blessing that brings structure and order to their often chaotic lives. But just as in ancient times, the positive energy of the king is often absent. Many leaders and authority figures, whether fathers, bosses, or mentors, fail to embody the king archetype, leaving a void that needs to be filled. When this energy is absent, men face the bipolar extremes of the archetype. On one side, tyranny, marked by control and abuse. On the other, weakness, characterized by a lack of leadership and direction. For the world to regain order and harmony, we need a revival of the king archetype, both in leadership figures and within every man. After all, it is the inner king who holds the power to transform chaos into purpose, both in the external and internal realms. The active shadow side of the king is the tyrant, who rules through fear, destruction, and control. A classic example is King Herod, who, feeling his reign threatened by the arrival of new life, the newborn Christ, sought to eliminate it before it could flourish. The tyrant perceives the vitality and potential of others as a direct threat to his fragile authority. This behavior is not limited to royalty. It is also found in parents who crush their children's joy and talents through harsh criticism, neglect, or even abuse. The tyrant represents the shadow of narcissistic individuals who relentlessly seek attention and admiration, but cannot handle criticism. Beneath their facade of pride and arrogance lies a core of inadequacy and vulnerability. When pressured, they lash out in anger, often directed at those they perceive as weak, projecting their inner frailty. They lack emotional stability and become paranoid, always fearing their power might be taken away. However, the tyrant is only one pole of the king's shadow. On the opposite side is the weakling, a man who has completely lost touch with the vital energy of the king archetype. Unable to govern his own life, he projects the king's energy onto someone else, constantly seeking external validation. This is the abdication syndrome. He becomes dependent, relinquishes his strength, and lets others guide his destiny. The true king in his fullness is the opposite of these shadows. He is anchored by a spirituality rooted in truth and a sense of devotion that transcends the ego. His presence brings calm and stability, even amid chaos. He is the clear voice that organizes, the steady force that provides security. The king strives for peace, growth, and harmony, not just among people, but with nature itself. Similarly, the warrior is an archetype often misunderstood in modern times. Many associate it with violence and aggression, and not without reason, as many have suffered from the shadow side of this energy. However, like all archetypes, the warrior persists even when repressed. When not acknowledged or channeled healthily, it manifests destructively and neurotically. A man who accesses the warrior in his fullness learns to balance his aggression with discipline, ethics, and a clear purpose. He does not act impulsively. His actions are guided by a deep sense of duty. He does not destroy for the sake of destruction, but to eliminate what is corrupt, unjust, or oppressive, making way for something new and virtuous to grow. Like a gardener pruning a tree to strengthen its growth, the warrior understands that destruction and creation go hand in hand. This approach is not merely a role, it is a way of life. The warrior, in his essence, much like the samurai of ancient Japan, lives by the way, a philosophy that combines focus, integrity, and dedication. He reminds us that true strength lies in knowing when to use his energy, and more importantly, when not to. In the balance between power and purpose, the warrior finds his fullness, serving something greater than himself. By understanding the archetypes of the king and the warrior in their light and shadow aspects, we realize that these forces are not just models for leadership or combat, but essential guides for a life of balance and meaning. Japanese warrior tradition teaches that there is only one way to face the battle of life, head on, with courage and determination. And there is only one possible direction, forward. For the warrior, hesitation is not an option, and every movement is made with purpose and conviction. He lives in a state of constant awareness, keeping his mind and body focused on the present moment. This is what the samurai called mindfulness, the ability to be fully awake to life, letting nothing escape. The warrior differs from the hero in a crucial way. While the hero is often driven by a romantic ideal and unaware of his own limitations, the warrior has clarity about his vulnerabilities and knows his limits. He does not act on blind impulses, but with precise discernment. This awareness does not weaken him. On the contrary, it strengthens him. The warrior knows that life is fragile, and thus every action is executed as if it were the last, with intensity and meaning. The samurai had a clear philosophy about this: to live with death as a constant companion. For them, accepting mortality was not a source of fear, but a source of power. Knowing that life is fleeting freed them from hesitation, allowing them to act with absolute focus in every moment. This clarity is what distinguishes the warrior. He does not simply fight, he does so with wisdom, honor, and a profound connection to the present. This mindset goes beyond battlefields or duels. It is a guide for life. The warrior teaches us that to live fully, we must face our challenges head-on without fleeing or procrastinating. He invites us to act with purpose, to remain alert, and to carry the awareness that every moment matters, because ultimately, it could be the last. This is the true art of living,